I'm Jessica, 32 female. I live in a small apartment that always smells faintly of linseed oil and mineral spirits, the occupational hazards of being an art conservator. For years, my life was a quiet rhythm of careful work, cleaning the grime from forgotten canvases, mending cracks in century-old paint, and bringing lost details back to life. It was a peaceful existence, built on restoring the integrity of other people's histories. I never imagined the biggest restoration project of my life would be my own family's, or that it would be built on a foundation of lies. This is the story of how renovating my ancestral home uncovered a crime that defined my family's fortune, and how I had to decide whether to bury the truth forever or risk everything to correct a wrong that was 100 years in the making. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The Vance family home wasn't a mansion, not in the modern sense of sprawling glass and steel. It was a relic, a 3-story Victorian relic on the edge of town, perched on a hill we called Whisperwind Lane. It had been in our family for 4 generations, a silent testament to the moment the Vances went from being simple merchants to a family of means. The official story was that my great-grandfather, Alistair Vance, had made a series of incredibly shrewd investments right before the Great Depression, securing a fortune that had sustained us, in varying degrees, ever since. The house was the first thing he bought. It was our legacy, our anchor, and, as I would soon discover, our original sin. When my grandmother passed away, the last Vance to live in the old house, the property fell to me. My mother had passed years ago, and my father, her only child, had never wanted the responsibility. He preferred a life of quiet academia, far removed from the pressures of family history. My uncle, Richard Sterling, my mother's much older half-brother from my grandmother's first marriage, had made it clear he thought I should sell. "It's a money pit, Jessica," he'd said, his voice smooth and practical over the phone. Richard was a corporate lawyer, a man who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. The house, to him, was a crumbling liability. Cash out, invest the money, don't let sentimentality ruin a perfectly good inheritance. But I couldn't. As an art conservator, I saw past the peeling paint and the creaking floors. I saw the handcrafted millwork, the intricate plaster medallions on the ceilings, the beautiful bones of a place that had held my entire family's history. I saw a project. More than that, I felt a responsibility. So, I ignored Richard's advice, liquidated a small trust my grandmother had left me, and decided to restore it myself. Not to flip it, but to live in it. To be the first Vance in 30 years, to truly call it home. My cousin, Ben Carter, was my sole supporter in this venture. Ben was a graphic designer, 6 years my junior, with an artist's soul and a healthy disdain for Uncle Richard's cold pragmatism. "He sees a spreadsheet, you see a story," Ben told me as he helped me pry open a window that had been painted shut since the 70s. "This place is amazing, Jess. It just needs someone to listen to it again." He was right. The house groaned and settled around us, its sighs smelling of old wood, dust, and forgotten memories. Every loose floorboard, every faded patch of wallpaper, felt like a whisper from the past. The first month was a blur of dust masks, crowbars, and takeout pizza eaten on drop cloths. I started with the library, a grand, wood-paneled room that had been my great-grandfather Alistair's sanctuary. It was the heart of the house, and it was in the worst shape. A slow leak in the roof had caused water damage along one wall, staining the dark oak and causing a section of the built-in bookshelves to warp. It was while assessing this damage that my carefully planned restoration took a sharp turn into the unknown. The damaged bookshelf section needed to be removed completely. I assumed it was fixed to the wall, a solid piece of cabinetry. But as I worked a crowbar into the seam where the wood met the plaster, I felt an unusual give. It wasn't the splintering of old wood, it was a clean, mechanical release. The entire bookshelf, about a 6-foot-wide section, swung inward with a low groan, revealing a dark, cavernous space behind it. A hidden room. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the kind of thing you read about in novels. Ben, who had been sanding a window frame across the room, dropped his tool with a clatter. "No way," he breathed, his eyes wide. "A secret passage." It wasn't a passage, but a compartment, about 4 feet deep and as wide as the bookshelf. The air that billowed out was stale and cold, carrying the scent of dry canvas and ill paint. An old leather satchel sat on the floor, and leaning against the back wall were several large, rectangular objects wrapped in yellowed linen sheets. They were canvases. My professional instincts took over, momentarily overriding the shock. I gently pulled one forward, my fingers trembling as I unwrapped the linen. The painting that emerged stole the breath from my lungs. It was a post-impressionist landscape, a vibrant, emotionally charged scene of a sun-drenched French vineyard. The brushwork was unmistakable, the use of color revolutionary for its time. It was a Beaumont. Specifically, I was almost certain it was Vines at Arles, one of 5 masterpieces by the reclusive artist Jules Beaumont that had vanished from a private gallery in Paris in 1925. The heist was the stuff of legend in the art world, a crime that was never solved, the paintings believed to be lost forever. Ben let out a low whistle. "Is that real?" I could only nod, my throat tight. We unwrapped the others. A haunting Beaumont portrait, The Girl in Grey, a delicate still life, 2 more landscapes, all 5 of the missing Beaumont paintings. They were here, hidden in the walls of my family's home. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by our ragged breaths. The official story of Alastair Vance, the shrewd investor, suddenly felt thin and fragile. Shrewd investments didn't just manifest as priceless, stolen art. My mind raced, connecting dots I never knew existed. Alastair bought this house in 1926, a year after the heist. He went from a man of modest means to being wealthy overnight. The dates lined up with a chilling precision. The foundation of my family, the source of our comfort and security for a century, wasn't a stroke of financial genius. It was a crime, a famous, unsolved art heist. We were living on the proceeds of stolen beauty. The weight of it was instant and crushing. The old house no longer felt like a legacy. It felt like a crime scene. And I, its sole inheritor, was now an accessory after the fact. The whispers I'd felt from the house were no longer memories, they were warnings. And I had just uncovered the secret they had been trying to keep for nearly 100 years. The discovery of the Beaumont collection left Ben and me in a state of suspended shock. We stood in the dusty, hidden compartment, the brilliant colors of the canvases seeming to glow in the dim light from the library. They were magnificent, alive with an energy that felt sacrilegious in its confinement. For nearly a century, these masterpieces had been suffocating in the dark, their existence a guilty secret held within the very walls that had sheltered my family. The air was thick with the moral weight of it all. What did this mean for us? For the name Vance, every comfortable memory I had of this house, every story of my great-grandfather's brilliance was now tainted. "What do we do?" Ben finally asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if afraid the paintings themselves could hear us. "We can't just put them back." "I know," I said, my own voice shaky. My mind, trained to think in terms of preservation and provenance, was screaming. The provenance of these paintings was a black hole, a notorious theft, and their current location was the endpoint of that crime. We need to understand this, all of it. My eyes scanned the small space again, looking for anything else. Tucked behind the last canvas was the old leather satchel I'd noticed earlier. It was stiff with age, the brass clasps green with verdigris. With a sense of dread, I lifted it onto a nearby table. The leather creaked in protest as I unfastened the straps. Inside, there was only one item, a small, leather-bound logbook, its cover embossed with the initials A.V. Alastair Vance. My hands trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with my great-grandfather's elegant, looping cursive. It wasn't a diary, but a ledger. The first several pages detailed mundane expenses and business dealings from the early 1920s. But then, about halfway through, the entries changed. The handwriting became more hurried, more agitated. He wrote of a trip to Paris in the fall of 1925. He mentioned a man named Silas, a disgruntled gallery guard with debts and a grudge. He detailed a plan, not born of malice but of desperation. His own investments had failed, and he was facing financial ruin. Then came the confession, written in stark, chilling detail. He and Silas hadn't been criminal masterminds, they had been opportunists. They took advantage of a lax security system, stealing the 5 Beaumonts in the dead of night. Silas was paid off and disappeared, while Alastair smuggled the paintings back to America. He never sold them. He couldn't. He wrote of his profound guilt, of the crushing fear of being discovered. The paintings were both his salvation and his damnation. He used his remaining funds as collateral, leveraging the prospect of his hidden assets to secure the loans that came the foundation of our family's fortune. He had created a gilded lie, using the stolen art not as cash, but as a secret guarantee. The final entry was dated 1948, the year before he died. "The beauty of them mocks me," he wrote. "They were my greatest sin, and I have chained my family to them. May God forgive me, for I never can." Reading his words, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. He had trapped himself, and by extension, all of us. He had built our family's house on a foundation of sand, and I was the one standing on it as the tide came in. "He stole them," I said, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. I summarized the logbook for Ben, who sank into a dusty armchair, his face pale. "So Uncle Richard was right," Ben murmured. "This house is a money pit, just not the way he thinks." The irony was bitter. Richard wanted to liquidate the asset, oblivious to the fact that the real asset was hidden in the walls and it was stolen. The next few days were a fog. We rewrapped the paintings carefully and placed them back in the compartment, swinging the bookshelf closed. The click of the mechanism locking felt like a cell door slamming shut. We told no one. Who could we tell? Every conversation felt hollow. Every glance at the family portraits hanging in the hall felt accusatory. My project, the joyful restoration of my family's history, now felt like a grim archaeological dig into a crime. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the vibrant colors I had seen, by the confession I had read. I spent hours in the library, poring over Alastair's books, searching for more clues. I felt like a detective in my own home. It was in a dusty old crate in the attic, filled with my grandmother's personal effects, that I found the second piece of the puzzle. It was another book, much smaller and more elegant than Alastair's ledger. This one was bound in dark blue leather with the name, Edouard Beaumont, stamped in gold leaf on the cover. Edouard Beaumont, the collector. The man from whom the paintings were stolen. My heart pounded as I opened it. It was his personal collection logbook. He documented every piece he ever acquired, with notes on the artist, the dimensions, and a small sketch. And there they were, 5 pages dedicated to the works of Jules Beaumont, his younger brother. His notes were not just clinical, they were deeply personal, filled with love and admiration for his brother's talent. The theft, he wrote, had broken him. The police had failed, the trail had gone cold. I flipped towards the end, and that's when I saw it. The final entry, written in a frail, shaky hand, dated years after the heist. It was a standing offer, a public declaration he had apparently made many times. He didn't want punishment for the thieves. He just wanted the art back. He called the paintings his brother's soul and believed they deserved to be seen by the world. And so, he had established a trust, managed by his estate. For the safe, complete, and anonymous return of all 5 paintings, the trust would pay a reward. My eyes scanned the figure, and I had to read it twice to believe it. It was a sum so large it was staggering, even by today's standards. It was a life-changing amount of money, put in place not as a bounty, but as a finder's fee, an act of desperation and hope from a man who loved his brother's work more than he hated the crime. He had died without ever seeing them again. This logbook, somehow acquired by my grandmother, perhaps through an auction or a book sale, a bitter coincidence, was his ghost, reaching out across the decades with one final, desperate plea. And a promise. The discovery of Edouard Beaumont's logbook changed everything. Alastair's confession had been a burden, a weight of guilt I had inherited. But Beaumont's promise was a key. It wasn't just a key to a fortune, it was a key to a solution, a path forward that wasn't paved with shame and scandal. It offered a chance not just to expose a crime, but to heal a wound that had festered for nearly a century. The reward was staggering, yes, but what struck me more was the tone of the entry. It was filled with a profound sadness, a yearning for reunion with his brother's lost legacy. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was seeking restoration. It was a language I, as a conservator, understood perfectly. I sat on the floor of the dusty attic, the two logbooks side by side. One was a confession of theft, the other a promise of reward. They were two sides of the same coin, a story of crime and a potential story of redemption. For the first time since finding the paintings, a sliver of hope cut through my anxiety. This wasn't just a problem anymore. It was a choice. "Look at this," I said to Ben later that evening, my voice trembling with the gravity of it all as I showed him Beaumont's final entry. He read it, his eyes widening. He looked from the logbook to me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Jess, this is a way out, a way to make it right." "It's more than righting a wrong," I said, thinking aloud. "The Beaumont estate still exists. They manage a museum in Paris. This trust, it might still be active." The next morning, my hands shook as I typed Beaumont Estate into my laptop search bar. Their official foundation website popped up immediately. It was a sleek, professional portal dedicated to preserving the legacy of Jules and Edouard Beaumont. My eyes scanned the Contact Us page, and my gaze landed on a name: Dr. Samuel Reed, art historian and curator. If anyone would know about a century-old trust, it would be him. Taking a deep breath, I drafted an email. I was careful, intentionally vague. I identified myself as a professional art conservator who had come across some historical documents that might pertain to the Beaumont collection. I mentioned an old logbook and a potential standing offer for lost works. I didn't mention the paintings. I didn't mention my name was Vance. I simply asked if Dr. Reed could spare a few minutes to discuss a matter of historical significance. I hit send before I could lose my nerve, my heart hammering in my chest. The waiting was agonizing. For 2 days, every ping from my phone made me jump. I tried to focus on the renovation, but my heart wasn't in it. The house felt different now, charged with a nervous energy. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a judgment. Finally, on the 3rd day, a reply appeared in my inbox. The sender was Dr. Samuel Reed. The email was brief and professional. He acknowledged that my query was unusual but intriguing. He confirmed the existence of the Beaumont Trust and the standing reward, stating that it was a legendary, almost mythical, part of the estate's history. He was eager to learn more about the documents I had found and suggested a video call. We scheduled it for the following afternoon. When I told Ben, he was ecstatic. "This is it, Jess, you're doing the right thing." His confidence was a balm, but a new fear was creeping in. The fear of my uncle, Richard Sterling. Richard was the executor of my grandmother's estate and still held some legal sway over family matters. He was sharp, calculating, and deeply protective of the family's status. He saw the world in black and white, profit and loss. He would never understand an act driven by conscience, especially one that could potentially unravel the family's reputation. If he found out what I was planning, he would try to stop me. He would see the paintings not as stolen art to be returned, but as an asset to be protected, or worse, quietly sold on the black market. The thought sent a chill down my spine. The video call with Dr. Reed felt surreal. He appeared on my screen, a kind-faced man in his late 60s with wisps of white hair and intelligent, curious eyes. He was sitting in an office lined with books, a Vermeer print visible over his shoulder. He listened patiently as I recounted, again vaguely, how I had discovered an old collector's logbook during a home renovation. I described the final entry, the promise of the reward for the 5 lost paintings. As I spoke, his professional demeanor softened, replaced by a look of profound fascination. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice tinged with a gentle academic excitement, "you must understand, the Beaumont Trust is the Foundation's greatest legend and its greatest sorrow. We have all the legal paperwork. The trust is very much active, its funds having grown to an astronomical sum over the decades, but it has always been a theoretical instrument. We never truly believed the paintings had survived, let alone that they would ever surface together." He leaned closer to the camera. You say you are a conservator. Do you have reason to believe you know the whereabouts of these works? This was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath. Dr. Reed, I said, choosing my words with extreme care. What I'm about to say is highly sensitive. The paintings, I believe I have found them, all 5 of them. They are safe and, from my initial assessment, in remarkable condition. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Reed stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a terrifying moment, I thought he suspected me, that he saw me as a criminal trying to extort money. But then, his eyes welled up. He took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief, his composure momentarily breaking. "My dear child," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you have any idea what you are saying? You have found the soul of the Beaumont collection." We spoke for another hour. I explained that the situation was delicate, tied to a complex family history. He was understanding, assuring me that the estate's primary goal, as laid out by Edouard Beaumont himself, was the recovery of the art, not the prosecution of the guilty. He promised complete discretion. The process would be simple. If the paintings could be authenticated, the trust would be executed. The reward would be Tr. Ansford, and the paintings would be returned to the Beaumont Foundation. No questions asked about the intervening years. It was exactly as Edouard had intended. When the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. It was real. The path was clear. I had a way to honor Edouard Beaumont's wish to free my own family from its gilded cage and to give these masterpieces back to the world. But as relief washed over me, so did a cold wave of dread. The biggest obstacle wasn't logistics or authentication. It was my own family. It was Uncle Richard. And I knew with absolute certainty that a battle was coming. With Dr. Reed's assurance of discretion, the next step was authentication. He couldn't fly from Paris on a moment's notice without raising flags, but he guided me through a preliminary verification process I could conduct myself. As a conservator, I had the tools and the expertise. For the next week, the hidden compartment became my clandestine workshop. Ben stood guard, a self-appointed lookout, ready to create a distraction if Uncle Richard decided to pay one of his surprise, check-in, visits. Working on the Beaumonts was the most surreal experience of my career. I was touching history, not as a restorer, but as a witness. I set up portable, full-spectrum lamps, illuminating the canvases in the cramped space. The paintings were breathtaking. Jules Beaumont had a way of capturing light that was almost spiritual. Under magnification, his brushstrokes were confident and fluid, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. I did a microscopic analysis of the paint pigments, comparing them to the known composition of Beaumont's palette from that era. Everything matched. I took high-resolution photographs of the craquelure, the fine network of cracks on the paint surface, which develops uniquely over time like a natural watermark. I documented the canvas weave and the construction of the stretchers. Every piece of evidence I gathered confirmed their authenticity. These were not forgeries. They were the real thing, preserved in the dark for 99 years, their colors still shockingly vibrant. But as I worked, the professional thrill was constantly overshadowed by a profound sense of melancholy. I was touching the evidence of my great-grandfather's crime. This canvas had been pried from a gallery wall. This stretcher had been smuggled in darkness across an ocean. This beauty was born of an artist's soul, but had been held captive by my family's fear. I sent the encrypted data files to Dr. Reed, pigment analysis, high-resolution images, and a detailed condition report for each piece. His response came within hours. "The evidence is overwhelming," he wrote. "I have cross-referenced your photographs with our archives. There is no doubt. These are the lost Beaumonts. We are ready to proceed whenever you are." His confirmation should have been a moment of triumph, but it only amplified my anxiety. The "whenever you are" part was the problem. I couldn't just crate up 5 priceless masterpieces and ship them to Paris. The house, and everything in it, was still part of my grandmother's estate, which meant Uncle Richard had a say. Legally, I was on shaky ground. Morally, I was certain of my path, but Richard operated in the world of legalities, not morals. The inevitable confrontation came sooner than I expected. Richard called me one evening, his tone unusually sharp. "Jessica, I was reviewing your grandmother's quarterly estate documents. You've withdrawn a significant amount from your trust. I hope you're not pouring it all into that decrepit house." "It's an investment, Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's a folly," he countered. "I'm coming by this weekend. We need to have a serious discussion about selling that place before you bankrupt yourself on a sentimental project." The words sent a jolt of panic through me. He was coming here. Ben and I exchanged a worried look. The paintings were back in their hiding place, but the secret felt like a living thing in the house, something he might sense. We had to act, and we had to act now. I couldn't risk him discovering the compartment. I couldn't risk him finding out from anyone but me. I decided to meet him on my own terms. I invited him to dinner the Saturday he was due to arrive. Not at the house, but at a quiet, neutral restaurant downtown. I needed to control the environment. I also asked Ben to be there. I needed his moral support. Richard arrived looking impeccable in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He exuded an aura of expensive, dismissive authority. He greeted me with a peck on the cheek and gave Ben a curt nod, his disapproval of Ben's more casual attire palpable. The small talk over appetizers was strained. Richard steered the conversation back to the house, laying out a logical, passionless argument for selling. He talked about property taxes, upkeep costs, and market values. He had charts on his tablet. Finally, I could. "Ain't take it anymore." I set my fork down and looked him directly in the eye. "Richard, the reason I can't sell the house is more complicated than you think. I found something there, something that changes everything about our family." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Don't tell me you found old love letters in the attic. That doesn't pay the bills." "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "I found the real source of the Vance family fortune. It wasn't shrewd investments." Ben sat silently beside me, his presence a warm, steadying force. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about the hidden compartment, the paintings, and Alistair's logbook. I watched his face as I spoke, saw the initial skepticism curdle into shock, and then into a look I couldn't quite decipher. It was a complex cocktail of alarm, disbelief, and something else, a flicker of avarice. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring into his water glass. "5 paintings," he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The missing Beaumonts. Do you have any idea what those are worth on the open market? We're not talking about millions. We're talking about hundreds of millions." "They're not ours to sell, Richard," I said firmly. "They were stolen." "Stolen a century ago?" he hissed, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "The statute of limitations is meaningless. There's no trail, no evidence connecting us. This is the greatest windfall in this family's history. It secures us for generations. It secures your future, Ben's future." Ben flinched as if struck. "I don't want a future built on that," Ben said, finding his voice. "Jess is right. It's stolen property." Richard ignored him, his eyes locked on me. "Don't be naive, Jessica. This is a gift. Our great-grandfather took a risk and it paid off. You think the Beaumont family needs this money? They're an institution. This is a rounding error for them. For us, it's everything. We can sell them privately, one at a time. No one ever has to know." The cold, calculated nature of his words made me feel sick. He didn't see the crime, the century of guilt, or the beauty of the art itself. He saw a commodity. He saw a balance sheet. He saw a way to perpetuate the very lie that had haunted our great-grandfather to his grave. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised me. "Absolutely not. I've already been in contact with the Beaumont estate. I'm arranging for their return." Richard's face went white, then purple with rage. "You did what? Are you insane? You've thrown away our family's legacy. You've confessed to a crime. I could have you declared incompetent for this." The battle lines were drawn. In that quiet, elegant restaurant, the soul of our family was being fought for. Richard saw a fortune to be claimed. I saw a wrong to be righted. The weight of the stolen beauty had finally become too much to bear, and its return was no longer just an option. It was a moral imperative, and my uncle had just declared himself its greatest enemy. The dinner with Richard ended disastrously. He stormed out of the restaurant, his face a mask of cold fury, leaving Ben and me sitting in a pool of tense silence. His final words to me, hissed under his breath, were a chilling promise. "I will not let you destroy this family, Jessica. I will stop you." I knew it wasn't an empty threat. Richard was a formidable opponent, a man who knew how to use the law as both a shield and a weapon. "What's he going to do?" Ben asked, his expression worried. "Anything he can," I replied grimly. "He'll try to get an injunction. He'll question my legal right to make decisions about estate property. He'll paint me as unstable, irresponsible." We drove back to the house, the atmosphere in the car thick with tension. The home that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a fortress under siege. Richard's threat had changed the equation. This was no longer a quiet, personal mission of conscience. It was a race. The next morning, I was on the phone with Dr. Reed, explaining the situation. My voice was tight with stress as I described my uncle's reaction and his threats. Dr. Reed listened with the calm, steady patience of a seasoned academic. "This is not entirely unexpected, Jessica," he said, his voice reassuring. "Great fortunes and great art often inspire the worst in people, but do not be deterred. The Beaumont estate has significant legal resources, and our position is morally and, I believe, legally unassailable. Edouard Beaumont's final wishes are documented and legally binding. The trust is clear. We are not accusing your family of theft. We are responding to a good faith offer to return lost property." He then made a proposal that was both brilliant and audacious. "We must move the paintings," he said. "They are not safe there. We will arrange for a specialized art transport company. They are discreet, bonded, and have experience with sensitive acquisitions. They will come to you, crate the paintings under your supervision, and transport them to a secure, climate-controlled facility at a neutral location. Once they are out of the house, your uncle's leverage disappears. He cannot lay claim to something that is no longer in his reach." It was a risky move, but it was also the only logical one. The plan was set in motion with astonishing speed. Dr. Reed handled the arrangements from Paris. A company called Art Guardian Logistics was contracted. They would arrive in 2 days in an unmarked truck, posing as a team hired for the renovation. The 48 hours leading up to their arrival were the most stressful of my life. Every car that drove down Whisperwind Lane made my heart leap into my throat. I half expected Richard to show up with a lawyer and a court order at any moment. Ben stayed with me, a constant, reassuring presence. We barely slept, existing on coffee and adrenaline. We moved some of my own large, blank canvases and conservation equipment into the library to make the cover story more plausible. On the appointed day, a plain white panel truck pulled into the long driveway. 2 people, a man and a woman in simple work clothes, got out. They introduced themselves as Sarah and David. They were calm, professional, and exuded an air of quiet competence. They carried in several unassuming-looking crates that were, on the inside, state-of-the-art, climate-controlled transport containers. I led them to the library and opened the hidden compartment. As the 5 Beaumont masterpieces were brought into the light one last time, Sarah let out a soft, reverent gasp. "I've only ever seen these in textbooks," she murmured. The process of packing them was meticulous. I watched, my conservator's eye scrutinizing every step as they carefully patted each painting and secured it within its custom crate. It was a slow, deliberate ballet of expertise. As the last crate was sealed, a profound wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, sadness, and a deep sense of rightness. I was letting them go. I was freeing them from their century-long prison. Just as David was moving the final crate towards the door, the unthinkable happened. A sleek, black sedan pulled up the driveway, parking directly behind the transport truck. Uncle Richard got out, followed by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. My blood ran cold. Richard stormed into the house, his eyes blazing with fury. He saw the crates, the 2 strangers, and me. His face hardened into a triumphant sneer. Well, Jessica, I thought I might find something like this. Trying to dispose of family assets, are we?" The man with him stepped forward. "Ms. Vance, my name is Arthur Croft. I am Mr. Sterling's legal counsel. We have an emergency court order preventing the removal of any and all assets from this property pending a full estate appraisal." He held out a document. I was frozen. He had done it. He had beaten me. But then Sarah, the art transporter, stepped calmly between me and the lawyer. She looked at the paper, then back at Mr. Croft, her expression unruffled. "With all due respect, sir," she said, her voice polite but firm, "this order pertains to the assets of the Vance estate. My client, the Beaumont Foundation, contends that these specific items are, and always have been, their legal property. They are not, and never have been, assets of the Vance estate. They are stolen goods, in the process of being returned to their rightful owner." Richard scoffed. "A ridiculous claim. They have been in this house for 100 years. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "Not in the case of stolen art, Mr. Sterling," Sarah replied coolly. "International art repatriation laws are quite clear on that. We are acting on behalf of the legal owners to secure their property. If you wish to interfere, you will be obstructing a lawful recovery, and my client's legal team in Paris will be very interested." She had called his bluff. Richard and his lawyer exchanged a look of uncertainty. They had come prepared to fight a family squabble over inheritance. They were not prepared to enter an international legal battle with a powerful foundation over a high-profile art crime. The mention of stolen goods and international law had changed the battlefield entirely. Richard sputtered, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. He was a corporate lawyer, not a criminal one. He knew when he was out of his depth. He saw his neat, tidy legal maneuver crumbling in the face of a far more complex and dangerous reality. He had wanted to control the paintings as an asset. He had never wanted to be publicly associated with a theft. While he stood there, momentarily silenced, David and Sarah took their chance. With quiet efficiency, they loaded the last of the crates onto the truck. Sarah handed me a signed receipt. "They will be safe, Ms. Vance," she said with a small, encouraging smile. I watched as the white truck backed down the driveway, navigated around Richard's sedan, and disappeared down Whisperwind Lane. The paintings were gone. They were safe. I had won. I turned to face my uncle. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of defeat and pure hatred. He had lost, and he knew it. The path to redemption was now clear, but I had made a powerful enemy in my own family. The departure of the paintings did not bring peace. It brought the quiet, unnerving calm before a storm. The house felt strangely empty, as if the secret it had held for so long had been its very heart, and now it was gone. Uncle Richard and his lawyer left without another word, but the look on Richard's face was a promise of retribution. He had been publicly outmaneuvered and humiliated, and a man like him would not let that stand. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. Richard, true to my fears, filed a petition to have me removed as the estate's primary heir, claiming I was mentally unfit and had acted against the family's best interests. His lawyers sent a barrage of letters, filled with threats and accusations. He was trying to bleed me dry, emotionally and financially. He was trying to isolate me. But he hadn't counted on 2 things: my own resolve and the formidable power of the Beaumont Foundation. The moment Dr. Reed heard about Richard's legal assault, he brought the full weight of the foundation to my defense. They provided me with a lawyer, a sharp, experienced woman named Clara Dubois who specialized in international art law. She flew in from New York and met with me and Ben in the now quiet library. "Mr. Sterling is playing a weak hand, but he's playing it aggressively," Clara explained, her demeanor calm and analytical. "His entire case rests on the idea that the paintings were a family asset. We will prove unequivocally that they were not. They were a liability, a crime that you, Jessica, have bravely sought to rectify." The legal battle was fought not in a dramatic courtroom, but through a series of depositions and hearings in a judge's chambers. It was a grueling process. Richard's lawyer tried to paint me as a naive, impulsive woman who had been duped by a foreign institution, throwing away her family's legacy for a fantasy. They brought up the cost of the renovation, my decision to quit a stable job at a museum to work for myself, anything to make me look irresponsible. Through it all, I held onto the truth. When it was my turn to speak, I told the judge everything, my voice clear and steady. I presented Alastair's logbook as evidence of the crime and Edouard Beaumont's logbook as evidence of the path to resolution. I didn't speak of my great-grandfather with hatred, but with a sad understanding of his desperation and guilt. My uncle believes our family's legacy is a number in a bank account, I said, looking directly at the judge. A fortune built on a lie. I believe our legacy is our name, our integrity. Alastair Vance lost that, and he regretted it until the day he died. I was given a chance to restore it, not just for me, but for all the generations of Vances who lived with a secret they may or may not have understood. That, Your Honor, is not acting against my family's best interests. It is fighting for its very soul. Ben also gave a deposition, speaking eloquently about my character and my motivations. He described how the discovery had weighed on us and how my only goal was to do the right thing. His loyalty was a rock I clung to during the entire ordeal. The turning point came when Clara presented a sworn affidavit from Dr. Samuel Reed. It detailed the Beaumont Foundation's history, the undeniable proof of the theft, and confirmed that the authentication process was complete. The paintings were, without a shadow of a doubt, the lost masterpieces. It also formally stated that, upon the final resolution of the legal challenges, the Foundation intended to fully execute the terms of the Beaumont Trust, including the promised reward, payable to the individual responsible for their safe return. Me. When the amount of the reward was stated in the affidavit, a shocked silence fell over the chamber. It was an astronomical figure, far more than the black market value Richard might have dreamed of. The irony was devastating. In his greedy attempt to secure a hidden, illicit fortune, Richard had tried to prevent me from accepting a perfectly legal, and far larger, one. His entire argument that I had acted against the family's financial interests was instantly obliterated. He was left looking not just greedy, but foolish. The judge dismissed Richard's petition a week later. In his ruling, he called my actions exemplary and a courageous act of historical and moral restitution. I had won. I expected to feel triumphant, but instead I just felt weary. I had fought and won a battle I never wanted. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my father. He and I had a distant relationship, but he had evidently heard about the legal fight. I read the judge's ruling, he said, his voice quiet. Your grandmother, she always seemed haunted by that house. She never said why. Now I think I understand. What your great-grandfather did was wrong, and what Richard tried to do was wrong. I'm proud of you, Jessica. His words, so simple and long overdue, meant more to me than the legal victory. It was a validation from a part of my family I thought I had lost forever. The battle was over. I had faced down my uncle, defended my choices, and in doing so, I had redefined what it meant to be a Vance. It wasn't about clinging to a tainted past. It was about having the courage to build an honest future. With the legal battle won and Richard silenced, a profound sense of peace settled over the house on Whisperwind Lane. It was a quiet, restorative calm that I hadn't felt since I first inherited the property. The renovation work, which had been a source of stress and dread, once again became a source of joy. As I stripped away old, faded wallpaper and refinished the beautiful oak floors, it felt like I was peeling back the layers of deceit and letting the house breathe again. I was no longer just restoring a building, I was cleansing it. A few weeks later, I flew to Paris at the invitation of the Beaumont Foundation. Ben came with me, his excitement infectious. Dr. Reed met us at the museum, a beautiful, light-filled building that housed the world's largest collection of Beaumont's work. He led us into a private wing, and there they were. The 5 lost paintings. They weren't crammed in a dark, secret compartment anymore. They were hanging on clean, white walls, illuminated by soft, expert lighting. Seeing them there, in their rightful place, free and admired, I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. They were finally home. "They are the collection's centerpiece," Dr. Reed said, his voice filled with reverence. "You have given us back our heart, Jessica." The foundation held a small, private ceremony for me. They presented me with the Beaumont Medal of Honor, an award reserved for those who have made extraordinary contributions to the art world. In a quiet meeting with the foundation's board and their bankers, the terms of Edouard Beaumont's trust were formally executed. The reward he had promised nearly a century ago was transferred to an account I had set up. The number was so large it felt unreal, more like a concept than actual money. When I returned home, the first thing I did was pay off the renovation costs. Then, I sat down with Ben and my father, who had flown in to see me. The three of us were the future of the Vance family now. "This money," I said, sliding the bank statement across the polished library table. "It came from an act of restitution. It needs to be used for something good. It needs to build something real, not just sit in an account." We decided to create our own foundation. The Vance Carter Foundation, dedicated to funding arts education in underserved communities and providing grants for the preservation of historical buildings. We would use our tainted legacy to create a new one built on creativity, preservation, and public good. My father, with his academic background, would help run the educational side. Ben, with his design skills, would create our public identity. And I would guide its preservation efforts. It was a new beginning, forged from the ashes of an old crime. As for Uncle Richard, I never heard from him directly again. I learned through the family grapevine that he had resigned from his law firm in disgrace and moved away. His greed had cost him everything: his reputation, his standing in the family, and the very fortune he had tried so desperately to claim. A year later, the house was finished. It was beautiful, filled with light and air, the ghosts of the past finally at peace. I didn't sell it. I lived in it, its rooms no longer whispering secrets of guilt, but echoing with the promise of a brighter future. Ben moved into the old carriage house out back, which we converted into a design studio for him. My father visited often, our relationship warmer and closer than it had ever been. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was in the library, the room where everything started. A package had arrived from Paris. It was from Dr. Reed. Inside was a beautiful, leather-bound book, the catalog for the new Beaumont exhibit, titled Homecoming. My name was in the acknowledgments, not as the heir of a thief, but as a courageous conservator and friend of the arts. Tucked inside was a small, high-quality print of one of the paintings, Vines at Arles. On the back, Dr. Reed had written a short note: "Every masterpiece deserves the light. Thank you for being its guardian." I framed the print and hung it over the fireplace, in the very room where its real counterpart had been hidden for so long. It was a reminder not of the crime, but of the choice that followed. A reminder that a legacy isn't just what you inherit, it's what you choose to build with it. My family's foundation was no longer built on stolen beauty, but on restored honor. And for the first time in 100 years, the house on Whisperwind Lane was truly home.